About it, Paul says the Antichrist hasn't come, but the spirit of Antichrist is working. And one of the things that I think the Christian church has failed to recognize is how it's working and through what it's working. We see in the end of the book of Revelation that God has something in store for Babylon. Babylon basically is not a religious system in the terms that we know religion by, that it's going to have a pastor, that's going to have a pope or something of that sort. But that system that Babylon had established is one that grips the whole world. It's one that possesses everybody in the sense that everything that people want she has. And our text, or our definition, or our definitive text has been verse 9 from chapter 18. The kings of the earth have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her, or literally in luxury with her. They're going to cry and lament her when they see the smoke of her burning. And it goes on and speaks of even the merchants, all the ships coming. When they see Babylon destroyed in a quick moment, everybody's crying. Nobody wants any part of her, yet everybody's been with her, everybody's slept with her. Now we've been dealing with this system, and we've been tracing this system through history. And as we trace this system through history, we find how complex it is. And not just complex in the terms of a system that's diverse. We've gone through various aspects of, I want to say history, because we're touching on many things in history. We've talked a little bit about how Babylon established the early systems of banking, how slavery came about as a result of financial debt, how literally money becomes the competitive factor that even Jesus, when he talks to his disciples, he says, you can't love God and mammon, making mammon the competition of God. He doesn't say you can't love Christianity and Judaism. He didn't say anything about you can't be a Christian and a Mormon. He didn't say anything of that sort. And yet these are the battles that Christians have taken upon themselves. They want to fight cults, the occults. They want to always teach a Jehovah's Witness how to be free from his religion. They want to liberate the Mormons. They want to tell Catholics that they're nothing more than saint-worshiping demon worshipers. They want to do nothing except fight these different aspects of Christianity that they refer to as cults, and they think they're fighting the devil. They think they're fighting Antichrist. They think they're withholding Antichrist or revealing something about Babylon, and yet they've missed the boat. Babylon isn't the Catholic Church. It's not the Mormon Church. It's not the Muslim Church. It's not any of these systems that we've come to point out. It's very complex. It's very intricate. It is something that began way back with Ur-Nammu in Babylon, 1500 BC, in that dynasty of Babylon that rose in that region of Akkad, Sumer, Babylonia. And it was a system that began during those times. Daniel the prophet, during the time of the captivity of Israel, when Nebuchadnezzar dreamed his dream, he saw the image of the man, the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar. Then we saw the arms joined at the breast, the Medo-Persian Empire. Then we saw the belly of brass representing the Greeks. Then we saw the legs of iron representing the Romans. Then we see the miry clay mixed with the iron of Rome, and then the ten-toed kingdom. And yet we see the kingdom of Christ striking the image in the foot and collapsing it all. It doesn't end until it's over. When Jesus comes and strikes that image at the foot, at the base, what happens? That's when Babylon finally falls. That's when the remnants of the Medo-Persian, that's when the remnants of the Roman, the remnants of the Greek, the remnants of all of these finally collapses at the appearance of Jesus and his system. So these systems are still operating today. And we're talking a little bit about the system. We've talked about how this system works in terms of politics, how the system's at work and literally entwined in almost everything we do in our society, how it worked its way through even the Roman system, the Grecian system, ultimately to the European system, how it's made its way into the religious system, even through Catholicism as well as Christianity. See, Christians like to pick on Catholics. They look at Catholics and say, oh, look at their religion. Their religion is vain because of the different liturgies that they perform. The priests are celibate, and the Christians, oh, look at them. The priests are celibate, ha, ha, ha. They're even homosexuals and perverts, ha, 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 ha. And yet how many pastors commit adultery? How many pastors sit in cars, whacking off and all that other stuff? And they catch them. Huh? No, they catch them. Why? What did Jesus say? Before you take the splinter out of man's eye, take the mote or the beam out of your eye. Why are Christians talking crap about the Catholics when their house is just as dirty and just as filthy, when they're just as stupid? I don't know why they do that. The Antichrist isn't the Pope. And it's not going to be, contrary to their surprise. Christians need to learn, just leave those things alone. Our job is to withhold Antichrist. But if we don't know where Antichrist is, we can't withhold him. Christianity needs to just leave those Catholics alone. Leave the Mormons alone. Leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. Leave everybody alone. If you want to go kick anybody in the teeth, go kick the devil in the teeth. Reveal his system to people. We see how this system now intertwines into politics. It intertwines into religion. It intertwines into the business community. It intertwines into the educational system. It intertwines into everything. And Babylon has become a part of everyday life, and yet the Christians don't even recognize it. In fact, Babylon is so entrenched in the church that the church doesn't even realize it's part of it. That's why the Bible even says everybody slept with her. Now, we're still talking about Hitler, but we took a little deviation out of Hitler only because we saw that Hitler basically was doing certain things and teaching and doing certain things and gaining access to the control of the masses. And when we began to see certain repeatables, we began to take a little side road and deal with these issues such as education. Because again, when things start to pop out and reveal themselves, we're going to chase the trail. All right? When these things start popping out, we're going to chase the trail and bring it to a conclusion. And then what we're going to do is we're going to jump back on and go forward again, and we're going to, again, deviate on the trail, but we're going to bring it to a conclusion. We're going to find that Babylon streams throughout the system, and this is why God hates it so much. So we've been talking, and again, we're using Thomas Sowell's Inside American Education. A lot of people sometimes as they hear these things, they find it very difficult to understand. There's, one of the first things they say is, oh, that stuff don't happen in our schools. If your kid goes to public school, it is. You just don't know about it. The public school system, yeah, we'll let that go. We'll let that go. We'll just keep reading. Public school system basically is tax-based, and they don't carry an agenda save the agenda of the people that fund it. We've been talking about these notions and these ideals that are really prevalent today that are actually part of the church now. And there are things that are being taught and things that are being emphasized, such as things as multiculturalism, how it's important to understand the multicultural aspects of our society. God's not multicultural, and let's establish that first. God isn't into multiculturalism. God isn't into relevance. God doesn't care what's relevant to you. God doesn't care whether you like eating pork or not. If God says don't eat it, you don't eat it, right? You might say, well, that's one of the primary beasts that we raise here on these farms, Lord. Well, if he says don't eat it, what do? You don't eat it. He doesn't care what's relevant to you. This is why I continually tell people, especially those who run around saying things like, God knows my heart. Your heart is irrelevant to God. What you think doesn't matter to God. Now, a lot of people get mad at that notion. What do you mean what I think doesn't matter to God? If he tells you to pay your tithe, what you think means nothing. How many kids you have means nothing. You pay your tithe. If he says, by his stripes you're healed, if he sent his son and gave him to be the final sacrifice for sin, but the icing on the cake is that he was beaten 39 times, that by his stripes we can be healed, then that's all there is to it. You don't got to drag yourself to some river in Lourdes and dip in the water. Your ideas are irrelevant to God. Your notions of what gets you healed mean nothing to God. Everything that he said means everything. And we've got to get ourselves to that point. Because the insult is for me to say, well, Charles, I know you're a black man from Palmdale, but your view of the world here in L.A. is irrelevant. Somebody would say, oh, Brother Daniel, that's awfully close-minded of you to completely disregard what Charles thinks altogether. Isn't that how God works? It's not politically correct for me to say to Charles, excuse me, Charles, a black man from Palmdale has absolutely no say here in Hacienda Heights in the Valley. We're just different out here. We don't open the back door and see the desert. Things ain't the same out here. When it gets dark out here, there's still light. When it gets dark where you live, it gets dark. It's different. So whatever you have to say, Charles, is irrelevant. Now, as far as political correctness goes, I'm not supposed to say that. Because there's supposed to be some relevance to what Charles is saying, whether or not it can contribute to us or not. Everybody says, everybody's thoughts and ideas count. Have you ever heard that? See, this is what's wrong with the church. If God says to the pastor, buy a bus, you don't have any business telling anybody what color it should be. If God tells me to have a picnic and I pick the park It's not up for discussion. You understand that? And somebody says, well, Brother Daniel, don't you think you ought to consider our thoughts and our feelings and our ideas? No. Isn't that the way it works? But you're not supposed to say things like that. Oh, Charles knows what I'm talking about. Relevance means nothing. But these are ideas that everybody's teaching everybody, that these are the ideas your kids are learning in school, that everybody's idea and everybody's opinion is valid and at least should be heard and is up for consideration, and that we should make concessions to some of these. Now, it's baloney. Now, listen, I'm not saying that we shouldn't hear things. I was watching, anybody watch that program that I think HBO just started airing? It's actually called Hate.com. Anybody watch that? Don't any of y'all watch good TV? If you get a chance to watch it, tape it. Hey, you know, if you don't know anything about white supremacy, and if you don't know anything about white supremacy websites, you'll know all about them when this is done. All right? I sat there watching this thinking, man, if I was a white boy and I had gripes and complaints, I didn't have any idea where to log on the web. But I do now. And by the way, they're all churches. Church of the Creator. They got the identity movements that we spoke about when we were talking about the evolution and the origin of races. But do you know who is actually teaching this stuff? It's the white supremacists. Now listen. Listen to the stuff they say. Some of these guys are very intelligent. Not all the racists are redneck, buck-tooth farm boys with a 6th grade education. A lawyer who happens to be one of the heads of this group stood up and he says, the white race is diminishing. No, isn't that what we said? And what is the answer to the white race diminishing? Got to have babies. Well, when he said it, he was racist. Now, we don't call him racist because he thinks that, do we? See, if you said, blacks have made contribution to our society, so we're going to recognize these contribution through Black History Month. What happens if a white man stands up and says, look at all the stuff we did. We want a month too. Now what happens? Now, let me ask you this, because, again, we've often spoken about this. The whole notion of all of these things is a humanistic search for what we believe is fair. Now, somebody would say, you know, blacks have 1 month to say, look what we've done, and yet we got to watch 11 months of what Whitey's done. So they don't get one. And we're going to have Hispanic History Month and, you know, all this other stuff. And yet this man brought up a point. Now, if he says, we just want to recognize what white people are doing instead of everybody beating them up all the time. Is there a rationale for him to say that? But what do people call him because he says that? Listen, if you were the devil and you were going to hide portions of the truth, what kind of people would you hide it in? These kind, right? This guy starts talking about what white civilization actually did for the world. The reason we have food to feed the whole world is because Britain and America farmed. And we get to help everybody. Where did all the technology come from? Now listen, let's not argue because, you know, everybody says, Chinese invented firecrackers and rockets. Did they put someone on the moon? Huh? Did they? Somebody said, Chinese can carve jade. They were artisans, great poets. Did they blow up a nuclear bomb in the desert first? Huh? They break the sound barrier? They perfect communications? Electronics, nuclear power? Did Africa? For the most part, did Europe? And then the one everybody hates, who ended slavery? Was white Christians. White Christians who abhorred the institution. Now, this guy's sitting on there talking about these things. I'm saying, ain't nothing wrong with that. Then the commentator comes on, it's this hatred. It's this kind of hatred we're talking about. And then they show you some. Now, their writings are terrible because they got this white girl on there. You know, the Mexicans and them niggers. And, you know, they always got to show you that ignorant one talking about go back to Africa and go back to Mexico. They always, and you sit there and you're thinking, what an idiot. Now, does that make everything they said a lie? So listen, we got to be able to do, again, listen, I'm just telling you, if you get a chance to watch that, watch it. Because you're going to get to hear a lot of this system that they're getting their butts kicked. Everybody knows it. You don't need to tell a white person you're diminishing with every generation. They know it. Now, somebody stood up and said, hold it. We must reverse this trend. What happens to that guy? He's a racist. Now, is he a racist? If I stand up and say, I'm a brown man and I'm proud. If Charles stands up and says, I'm a black man and I'm proud. If Jeff stood up and said, I'm white and I'm proud. Suddenly everybody's eyebrows go up, don't they? So, we're looking for fairness. So I jump up and say, brown pride. Charles stands up and says, hey, I'm black, I'm proud. And then Jeff stands up and says, I'm white and I'm proud. Everybody's eyebrows go up like if he's got a rope in the trunk. Hey, isn't that the impression everybody gets? So in our quest for fairness, doesn't fair become unfair? And we talked about this. You can't kick Whitey repeatedly, lie on him repeatedly, tell him how crummy he is repeatedly, and not have some form of a backlash. Now, again, in all these things we're talking about, when you decide we're going to teach multiculturalism, what does multiculturalism create? Racism. What does relevance create? Racism. So when you seek fairness, what does it create? So let me ask you a question. These bubbas out in the hills realizing they're about to be outnumbered by an agenda, what does it create in them? That's right. This is the stuff that this creates. The devil found a good place to hide some of this truth. This is why I told. Remember when we were talking about the origin of the races? I was making mention that a lot of this stuff you're going to hear if you listen to white supremacists, because they had to trace another lineage other than the Judaic or Hebrew migration from Israel through Assyria over the Caucasus across Europe. They had to find another migration they can identify with. They identified themselves with the Aryans. That's why Hitler liked these guys. In fact, when you talk about white supremacy movements, what do they call themselves? The Aryan Brotherhood, the White Aryan movement, right? The White Aryan resistance. Why do they call themselves Aryan? Don't they know who the Aryans were? Aryans were Persians. Medo-Persians. Medo-Persians were who? That's where King Cyrus came from that released the Jews. But where did the kingly line of Cyrus the Medo-Persian come from? It came from Judah, Egypt, mixed with Persia. The high kings of Persia. So were they really, they were blonde and blue-eyed white boys, but what were they? They were Semitic, even Hamitic, by the Caspian Sea, who migrated west themselves. So they were looking for another lineage to identify with, but God fooled them all. Same folk. These Aryans. But we already talked about that. This is why I say, you're going to hear all this stuff, but the minute you start talking about this, people are going to say, oh, you're a British Israelite. What? Oh, you're one of those proponents of Aryanism. And you look at it, why do they call you names? You start to tell them what you believe, and immediately they call your name. Why do they do that? So that they don't have to deal with you based on facts. If you start to tell somebody, Charles, or anybody, if you start to Dan Zan ran into this already. He's talking to some girl about how Genesis 10 is the genesis or the regenesis of nationalities, ethnicities, and cultures. And he starts to talk in this. Why do I need to know that? What does that have to do with everything? Why do people got to act stupid? Trying to reveal light to them, they act stupid. If you get a chance, peg that thing on HBO. It's called hate.com. Check it out. We talked about the whole person. This is the new agenda. Everybody wants to deal with the whole child. The whole child. What child is whole? In fact, which adult is whole? There's some adults are the wrong kind of holes, but... All right, we got to the part here. We're at the end of, let's see, teaching the whole person. The conclusion of the whole person is to teach issues instead of intellectual principles to school children is like teaching calculus to people who have not learned arithmetic, or surgery to people lacking the rudiments of anatomy or hygiene. Worse, it is teaching them to go ahead and perform surgery without worrying about the horrible details. So, again, what the doctor here was talking about was that children in school learning about the rainforest aren't anywhere near prepared learning about the rainforest or speaking against the stripping of the rainforest because they don't know nothing about the rainforest. They don't know anything about the politics. They don't know anything about the financial situation these people that own the rainforest are in. They don't have a clue as to the socioeconomic effects of even politics taking place. But yet they're screaming about the rainforest. Kids talking about save the whale. How many of your kids ever come home talking about whales? Huh? Why the hell are they learning stuff about whales and saving them? If a whale doesn't migrate, it deserves to die. Y'all see that whale on the news? If it was stupid enough to stay, it's stupid enough to die. Let them feed the sharks. These people believe in Darwinism, but they don't believe in Darwin's theory of the strong survive. They got to go save the weak. Maybe that's why our human race is in such bad shape. There's some people you don't need to save. All right? Damn it, he's overdosed again. Call 911. Put the ice under his neck and under the other parts. Perform mouth to mouth. How many times do we have to do this? Huh? Let him go. Somebody says you wouldn't talk like that if it was someone you loved. Maybe. Listen, God wanted them to live, he'd make them live. All right. What Dr. Soul is saying here is kids have no business learning these things. What does a kid know about no drugs? Huh? Kids stand out in the schoolyard and they yell no drugs. They put on red ribbons, they write no drugs on the fence. What do they know about drugs? What do they know about the drug market? What do they know about the war on drugs that, by the way, is causing more crime and causing more trouble than it's causing an answer to the situation? What do kids know about the war on drugs? Now, by the way, when they talk about the war on drugs, what are they really teaching kids to do? How to spy on their parents. You ever see joints in your house? Huh? You ever smell this smell in your house? What are they, what really? What do kids know about it? Why do kids even learn this in school? All right, role models. One of the most wide, again, what are we talking about? We're talking about this assorted psychobabble that's become part of the educational system. And again, what is the whole rationale and purpose behind all of this? It's to control the minds of a new generation so that they won't think like you. Because if they think like you, they might resist Antichrist. Isn't that right? If they think like you, they'll resist Antichrist. If they think like you, they'll love God. If they think like you, they will love this country. If they think like you, they will fight against these silly agendas that are designed literally to break down not only this country, but they're designed to break down your family, thus break down the church and break down Christianity. One of the most widely accepted, or at least unchallenged dogmas in American education today is that students need role models from the same social background as themselves. Is that true? Somebody says, if a brown kid doesn't see a brown teacher, he'll never aspire to be a teacher. You know, it's quite the opposite. The first time my mother took me to a restaurant and I saw Juan and Pedro cleaning the tables, not getting the tips, I knew I didn't want to be a busboy. I wanted to be the white dude who's going to college and gets to take the tip off the table. Huh? I wanted to be the checker at the check stand that gets to get on the microphone and say, Jesus, aisle 10, clean up. Jesus, aisle 10, clean up, right? Quite the opposite. I didn't need to see a Mexican behind the cash register to know which one I wanted to be. Huh? You ever notice there's a white guy always takes your money at the burrito stand while the Mexicans are in the back sweating and cooking? Which one do you want to be? One of the most widely accepted or unchallenged dogmas in American education is that students need role models from the same social background as themselves. From kindergarten to colleges and universities, the dogma holds sway that students that are often taught more effectively by people of the same race, ethnicity, culture, or sex as themselves. Is that right? If they ain't like you, they can't teach you. Right? Now, how do you think Moses felt on the mountain with God teaching him? How do you think the church felt having Jews teach them? I guess women can't accept the gospel because I'm a man. See, this is why women want to be pastors, because they're more sensitive than Daniel. That's why we need more people like Joyce Myers. So they can parade that long below the knee skirt and funky flat shoes and teach women how to dress. Tell me this crap isn't in the church. This is why T.D. Jakes dresses like a pimp. I mean, the only other man who can get away with wearing suede and denim is a pimp. Or bright yellow suit and yellow shoes. I mean, I ain't seen that outfit since Huggy Bear on Beretta. They want to be sensitive. I guess if you can't be a woman, you may as well dress like a woman would dress you. Many of those who espouse this doctrine have the most obvious self-interest in doing so. Teachers and directors of bilingual education programs, Afrocentric programs in schools, and various ethnic study programs in college all preserve jobs and careers for themselves. Oh, that's nice. I guess since LA's full of Hispanics and I become a teacher, and I argue the fact that, well, since there's so many Hispanics around, it, you know, if I can be their role model, if I can be the administrator and the head teacher and the head Ebonics, you know, and the head Spanglish teacher, you know, I'll be able to communicate with them better. So without any empirical evidence that this is true, these people basically, what's he saying? That they only argue these points to keep a job. Teachers and directors of bilingual education programs, Afrocentric programs in schools, and various ethnic studies programs in college all preserve jobs and careers for themselves, free of competition from members of the majority population, by using the role model dogma. So I guess if you're black and a minority, and you want to be a teacher, but the white teachers are teaching black kids, the way you get in is by saying what? I'm black and children need a black role model in order to learn. Now listen, I went to school in LA and all my teachers were white and a few of them black. And you know what? I have to tell you this honestly. A black lady in 3rd grade and a white lady in 5th grade gave me the love of reading that I have today. None of them were brown. In fact, the only brown guy on the campus was the janitor that threw sawdust on the throw up when people puked. And naturally, they were in the cafeteria. This is how my now let me ask you this. If we give Charles a job in the inner city and displace white workers, because the idea is black kids will learn better from a black man, what do you think that white teacher and his family and all his friends think of black people? And vice versa. If they say, Charles, we're going to transfer you back to South Central, and we're going to give a white man that job in Beverly Hills, but it never works the opposite, by the way. What happens? Don't you feel like you've been slighted? Somebody's promoting this idea out of fairness, but is it fair? What is this stuff doing? What are you finding out this stuff does to people? Does this stuff bring about fairness, or does it create more racism, more hatred, more division? You starting to understand why God hates Babylon? So do feminists, homosexuals, and others. Administrators who've caved into demands for various enclaves of pressures for particular groups likewise had vested interest in their dogma as a defense against critics. Around this solid core of supporters of the role model idea, there's a wider group of people who wish to catch on to the latest buzzwords or to be able to be on the side of angels, as it is currently defined. Historically, there have been good and bad and indifferent schools where students and teachers have all been of the same background, where students and teachers were wholly different backgrounds, all sorts of combinations in between. There's no empirical evidence that any of those similarities or differences are correlated with educational results, and considerable indications are that they are not. So it doesn't make a difference who the teacher is. One of the most academically successful of the all-black schools was Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. during the period from its founding in 1870 till its rapid deterioration in the 50s, in the wake of new rules for selecting students. In addition to producing good academic results in general during this period, Dunbar also produced an impressive list of the first black to enter a number of fields and institutions ranging from West Point to Annapolis to the federal judiciary and to the presidential cabinet. Its curriculum, however, was hardly Afrocentric, and it was so traditional as to include Latin long after most American schools had abandoned the ancient language. While Dunbar's teachers were black, another equally high-quality black school, St. Augustine in New Orleans, was founded and manned by whites of the Josephite order. Basically what happened is they all scored the same. The role model dogma is pork barrel politics masquerading as educational philosophy that is wholly unsubstantiated claim has been taken seriously by the media and by public officials is one more sign of the vulnerability of our minds and institutions to these vehement assertions and to student attacks on all who question them. Let's jump into self-esteem. Still talking about that crazy psychobabble. The notion that self-esteem is a precondition for effective learning is one of the more predominant dogmas that have spread rapidly through the American educational system in recent years. How many of you heard about self-esteem? Huh? Everybody's kid got to have Listen, to learn you don't need self-esteem. You need to shut up and listen to the teacher. You need to have respect for the educational system. It's like church. I get sarcastic and I say sit down, shut up and learn. But isn't that what teaching is about? You know, my kids, I don't have to listen to them talk when I'm trying to teach them something. I tell them, be quiet. Shut up. Don't talk. I'm trying to tell you something. Because they don't have anything to contribute. I know they don't know. The notion that self-esteem is a precondition for effective learning is one of the more prominent dogmas to have spread rapidly throughout American educational system in recent years. However, its roots go back some decades to the whole child-centered approach of the so-called progressive education. Like so much that comes out of that philosophy, it confuses cause and effect. No doubt valedictorians feel better about themselves than do students that have failed numerous courses, just as people who've won the Nobel Prize probably have more self-esteem than people who've been convicted for a felony. You know, there's self-esteem comes from achievement. If they don't achieve, they don't get self-esteem. So what are kids supposed to do? Now, if a kid gets straight A's in school, do you think they'll have a higher self-esteem than the kid that doesn't? Now, isn't it funny how, and I never understood this when my parents would do it to me, but if I'd come home and had C's, I thought like, hey, C, that's average. I did good. And my parents would not have any of it. And it wasn't until later on that I realized what it was they were aiming for. You can't be satisfied with C's. Now see, what my parents were doing was they were trying to give me a level of self-esteem to achieve. Because, it's like I said Sunday, everybody's kids are smart when you ask their parents. I mean, don't let those 2 felonies on his record fool you. He's a smart kid. He dropped out, but he could have been head of the class had he applied himself. Now listen, what are parents doing? Parents are still trying to infuse some type of self-esteem in that kid. Even though the rest of the world sees them as garbage and roll their eyes, the parents are still trying to at least establish some self-esteem in the kid. But why is that kid out doing these things? Because he has no self-esteem. If he had self-esteem, why is he doing everything that indicates he has none? You get self-esteem from your parents. Self-esteem comes from your relationship with God. When you realize how God esteems you, then you get self-esteem. See, some people, isn't this funny how, and I knew people like this, they look in the mirror and they see pimples on their face and they don't want to walk outside. If I consider you a person I like to talk to, I like to be around, that pimple means nothing to me. But when they see themselves in the mirror, what do they say? I ain't going outside. Self-esteem. Self-esteem has been perverted. And this world gives you a version of self-esteem that is everything except what God intended it to be. Now listen. When we watch God come to Gideon and say, the Lord is with you, the mighty one of valor, and Gideon sees the angel of the Lord, the first thing Gideon says, I'm the least in my father's house. Who am I that I should deliver Israel? Why are you coming to me? I can't even talk right. I'm not your man. Does that sound like negative self-esteem to you? It does, doesn't it? But it's negative self-esteem in comparison to what? To the presence of the angel of the Lord. Right? Now, Job was the richest man in all the East. Where do you think his self-esteem level was? Huh? But when he got in God's ear, and God finally decided to straighten him out, now where was his self-esteem? Huh? Didn't even want to talk. Isn't that right? Self-esteem comes from God's view of you. Now see, Job shut his mouth. Realized his friends, his ideologies, their philosophies of when he's got double. If he was the richest man in the East before all that trouble, and then God gave him double and multiplied times his riches and family, now what do you call him? The richest rich man? I mean, what do you call him? See, that's what self-esteem is. Self-esteem comes from God's view of you. To the kids, self-esteem comes from the parents' view of the kids. See, and some parents need to know what God thinks of them, so they don't continually tell their kids they're nothings either. Because nothing from nothing, Billy Preston said, what? Leaves nothing. So if you tell your kid, I want you to be better than me because I'm nothing, your kid isn't stupid. He looks at mom and says, well, she's nothing, and he's nothing, so I'm nothing. See, that little genius you brag about picks up on these things. You know, I didn't go to school, and this is why I have to labor this way. And, your mom, I knocked her up at 15, and she didn't have a chance to do much. So, as a result, we labor, and we're struggling with this stuff. And here you are. And your kid looks at you and says, loser. Looks at mom and says, I better take my role. See, now again, why do parents view themselves like that? That's the way God views you. God doesn't view you as a mess up. God takes you from a mess up, makes you the king's son, puts the robe and the ring on you, regardless of what your status is in society, regardless of whether you wait for a check every 3rd and 15th, God makes you his son. And you don't communicate anything to that kid save that. That's where self-esteem comes from. Self-esteem comes from parents. Self-esteem doesn't come from school. Your kid doesn't need no principal to give him. You ever notice the awards they give kids nowadays? Hey, listen, what the hell is most improved? Isn't most improved was, he was the crappiest, but we notice he's coming up. You ever see some of these prizes they give? Most improved. Could you imagine how bad you got to be for somebody to notice you're getting it? They give these awards. He's the most improved. Most improved runner-up. You ever see some of these school awards assemblies? Most artistic. I ain't lying to you. Most inspirational. What? You don't need inspiration in school. Do your frickin' homework. Get an A. So you inspire other kids. Big deal. Are they all getting A's? You ever see these award assemblies? I laugh at this one at my daughter's school. They got one award. It says it's called Most Christ-like. And I look at that and said, what a terrible burden to put on a kid. Most Christ-like. Holy crap. And when you read the thing, is everything they do exemplifies Christ, exemplifies this, and they do what Jesus would do. I'm thinking, what a terrible burden to put. And check this out. When your kid wins the most Christ-like, the parents come up to you like you got the prodigy. Yours is the golden child. Oh, congratulations. Oh, we're so proud of you. I don't mind telling you, Brianna won it watching The Simpsons with me. South Park and Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill. You ever see some of these? Now what they say, we need to recognize these children for what? To give them self-esteem. And not to mention, we don't want to give them letter grades anymore because there's too big a difference between A and F and D and C and B. So everybody gets an S. Some get S plus, some get S minus, and some just get S. But they all get an S. So when kids ask, what'd you get in school? S. Me too. Or now what they do is they say, oh, we're going to score them 1 through 4. What's that mean? I don't know. We're going to rate them 1 through 4. Nobody fails. Everybody gets a number. We don't want to mess with their self-esteem. Now, what are they trying to do? They're trying to be fair. They're trying to make everybody equal. It's that humanistic deception. There's no equality. We talked about it 2 Sundays. There's no such thing as equality even in nature. So why would a human being decide they want to be equal? I don't think it's right that Charles lives out there where it's hot. Or Jeff lives on the other side where it's hot too. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair that David walks across the parking lot while everybody else has to go through the freeway. There's no such thing as fair. Self-esteem comes from parents. It's none of the school's business to teach your kids self-esteem. Outside the world of education, few would be confident or even comfortable claiming that it is a lack of self-esteem, that is a lack of self-esteem which leads to felonies, or its presence which leads to Nobel Prizes. Yet American schools are permeated with the idea that self-esteem precedes performance rather than vice versa. See, everybody's telling you that if your kid doesn't have self-esteem, he won't achieve. But the reason your kid doesn't achieve is because he doesn't have self-esteem. The very idea that self-esteem is something earned rather than a prepackaged handout from the school system seems not to occur to too many educators. Too often American educators are like the Wizard of Oz, handing out substitutes for brains, bravery, and heart. I remember my mom going back to school trying to figure out why my younger brother couldn't read. And they passed him. That's why, my mom used to embarrass us. She'd go to open house and say, how come I don't see him with homework? And when you're a kid, you just like, oh no. She went back to school and she says, my son can't read and it's your fault. And you passed him. Why did they pass him if he couldn't read? Because they didn't want to mess with his self-esteem. The practical consequences of self-esteem dogma are many. Failing grades are to be avoided to keep from damaging fragile egos, according to their doctrine. So a teacher that believes in this dogma of self-esteem, she says everybody does good. That's the teacher says everybody passes. I like that one case out in, I think it was in Inglewood School, where the valedictorian was a 4.2 GPA, and she couldn't even pass an assessment battery to get into a JC. Now, to get 4.2 GPA, she was in AP courses. And when her parents went and protested, the valedictorian, man, couldn't pass an assessment battery, get into the JC, man. She had to take all these basic math courses that she should have learned in high school. And they found out, well, they were grading on a curve, and she scored 60. It was the highest, so she got the A. Now, what's 60 when you take a test? That's an F, man. You figure you get 90, that's an A. 80, you got a B. 70, you get C's. 60, you get D. You on the border, man. And she was the valedictorian. Now, what doctrine of self-esteem do you think those teachers were looking after? Thus, the Los Angeles school system simply abolished failing grades in the early years of elementary school, and many leading colleges and universities simply do not record failing grades on the student transcripts. Other ways of forestalling a loss of self-esteem is to water down the courses to the point where failing grades are highly unlikely. A more positive approach to self-esteem is simply to give higher grades. The widespread grade inflation of recent decades owes much to this philosophy. This is why kids get A's and they still can't read. Here's why kids tell you they're on the honor roll and they're morons. Have you ever seen a school, and I'm not picking on, but have you ever seen schools or classes where all the kids get A's? How likely is that? Yet it happens all the time today. While the role model dogma is more obviously self-serving than self-esteem dogma, the latter is not wholly free of self-interest. It's much easier to water down academic courses, replace them with non-academic activities, or give automatic high grades for either, than to take on the serious and difficult task of developing intellectual competence among the masses of school children. So it's easier to do this than to teach. Whatever the intentions of John Dewey or other pioneers of progressive education philosophy, its practical consequences have been steady retreat from the daunting task of making mass education a serious attempt to rise student American children to a standard rather than to bringing the standard down to them. The self-esteem doctrine is just one in a long line of educational dogmas used to justify or to camouflage historic retreat from academic education. Its success depends on the willingness of the public, elected officials, and the media to take on such dogmas seriously without the slightest evidence. American school children and American society are the ultimate victims of this gullibility. So these whole notions of, by the way, why is the school teaching self-esteem anyway? Now, what's the whole idea behind this? The whole idea behind this is there's an agenda. Now, we may or may not talk a little bit about John Dewey, but John Dewey, he's the guy that basically is a humanist, and he is the one that basically helped put together and author even that which is referred to as the Humanist Manifesto. Basically, that says that humans are everything, and these are the men that use these words such as potential and all these other great flowery words to describe men. And they establish a doctrine and a dogma that literally believes they're going to take men to their evolutionary apex and make them gods. And people actually believe this is the predominant dogma in education. And this is totally contrary to what God teaches. It's totally contrary to God's word. It's totally contrary to the things that God's Word teaches. And kind of to calm myself down, I had to come to a realization that teachers are merely pawns in this particular game. Teachers are merely just a piece of the system that's designed to wrench the children and their values from God and from their parents. This is why they'll tell your kids, you got Jenny Sue pregnant. We won't tell nobody, especially your parents. That's why they can run your daughter to the abortion clinic. That's why they can give your daughter birth control and not have to tell you. This is why they can teach you how to mix and match drugs and things and not have to say anything to anybody. Places the responsibility back on parents. That's why God doesn't like Babylon. These are the things that we're talking about. We're trying to move from an area of humanism. Again, this is just one of the isms that basically fit into what Romans chapter 1 speaks of. Seeking to be wise, they become fools. Whether it's humanism, whether it's Deweyism, Darwinism, scientism, anyism. These are merely movements that are part of this system that's designed to break you away from God, His Word, God's system that He laid down. And these are part of those groups that God literally turns over to reprobate mind to believe a lie and be damned. And at least as the children of God, if we're going to withstand and withhold Antichrist, we need to know how he's working. And he's working through... See, people, again, will hear this and say, Daniel says the Antichrist is working through the school system. Listen, the teachers are not possessed by the Antichrist. They're not possessed by the devil. But they are so wrapped up in a system dependent on tax dollars, grants, and foundations. Now, where do these grants and foundations come from? Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, right? Rhodes Scholarship Foundations. Where are these systems coming from? What are these men? What are their ideals? What are their plans? So they're nothing more. Teachers are nothing more than pawns. School systems are nothing more than the avenue to introduce these doctrines to your children. And this is why I continually tell people, if anything. Now, a lot of people get real mad when they hear this. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to take responsibility. And as a result of that, what happens is you end up with kids that are arguing with you about multiculturalism, about relevance, about self-esteem doctrines. That's why kids will look at you and say, I get more self-esteem out of school than I get out of mom and dad. Listen, the school is handing away trophies for nothing, for non-accomplishment. Mom and dad are looking for true, valuable accomplishment before they pat you on the back. And you're not going to get it till you pass that test. Now, the school may tell you everything. The school may give you a bumper sticker to put on your dad's SUV, may give you a T-shirt to wear, tell you you're the student of the month. I'd like to see a survey poll, or I'd like to see a statistics chart of how many students of the month have gone on to be felons. Really, I'm curious. Because these are all given to raise their self-esteem. Your kid's self-worth and value comes from pedigree. Comes from who you are. If your kid knows who you are and what you are, he'll have self-esteem. Doesn't come by the school. It's none of their business to tell your kid he's good. Just as like us. The world can tell you how good you are. The world can tell you how great you are. But the only person we ever want to hear any of those words from is Jesus when he says to us, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Amen. He's the only one we ever want to hear that from. And the schools want to set themselves up in that place You've got various city and government programs that'll make you the man of the year. You ever see some of the people up for Nobel Peace Prizes? You ever read the list of nominees? It's insane. Some of these people up for literary, it's insane. Yet, people want to hold them up like they're great heroes, like they've accomplished something. The standards of men are not like the standards of God. And the faster the church learns that, the faster we'll grow up into being that Christian that God's looking for. That's why I have a problem with a lot of these Christian schools. They want to be like the world. We want accreditation. If somebody's able to accomplish without their degree, they want to give them honorary doctorates. Make them one of them. I'm waiting for a preacher to step up on that platform, tell them to roll that thing up and stuff it where the sun doesn't shine. I would love to see one of these guys stand up there and tell them, like Paul, everything you learned here at this beautiful and glorious institution that just set you back for 4 or 5 years of your finances, you need to take it and throw it and count it as dung in exchange for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ. You ever hear somebody say that at a graduation? Huh? Yet isn't that what Paul said? How come nobody says that at graduation? Because you don't want to damage anybody's self-esteem. You don't want to mess with anybody's ideas of what they've just accomplished. I believe in what Paul did. He said to Timothy, ordain elders, set up bishops. That's how you do it. You don't go fish them out of the Essene school. You don't go fish them out of the Pharisee school. You go get them from the public life, like you did the tax tables, where you got Matthew from, and Levi. You go get them from the street, like you did Simeon. You go get them from the fishing ports, like you got Peter and Simon. You go get them from the walks of life. You don't go get them from the schools. You don't become any more qualified to preach or teach because of what school you go to. You become qualified to preach and to teach because God puts an anointing on you, and because you sit under a man of God that recognizes the gift. And not only does the man of God recognize the gift, but everybody sitting around you recognizes the gift, to the extent that one day you get appointed to be a deacon. Next day you get appointed to be an elder. Next time you're a bishop. Next thing you know, you got hands laid on you and you're being released for ministry. That's how it works, biblically. But you ask Eddie, you go to a big church or you go to school? Again, depends on what ism you want to follow. School wants to know, if you're going to be in charge of the church, you need to be aware of how to deal with children of molestation. You need to be aware of how to deal with kids and how to deal with teens whose parents have been alcoholics. You need to learn how to deal with some of these silly women who are, divorced and, unstable in mind. You've got to know how to deal with these people. You've got to have several units of sociological background. You don't need any of that crap. You need to just tell people, we're not counseling in this church. You sit down, shut up, and you learn. And if you believe in the anointing of God, you sit there till a dose of that hits you and cleans your life up. Who said you had to deal with kids that are molested? Man, there's a lot of people that have been molested. You sit down, shut up, and let the Word of God clean you up. Man, do you listen? How many times did Jesus sit with one of these disciples who obviously displayed signs of dysfunction? How many times did he sit down with them and have to nurture them and guide them through and process them through their problem? Huh? I don't believe in that crap. What has the church come to? Well, we got to protect ourselves now from molestation. Well, don't ordain no perverts. We got to protect ourselves from pedophiles. Don't put them in the children's church. We got to guard ourselves from adultery. Well, don't screw around. Church has become like any other institution. You know, in the business world, the CEO gets to bang everybody, and he's still a hero. When the preacher does it, they want to boot him. Why? Why they hold him to a higher standard? David was still the king. All right, we're done. Any questions?